Welcome to our intermediate session. Hopefully everyone is geared up. We covered some basics yesterday. Today we're going to piggyback on what we learned yesterday. And the type of topics that we're going to cover in today's session, it's going to be all about authentication, password protection. We're going to learn how to stamp records from one table to another. And we're also going to learn how to set up record level security. So when user A logs in, they see their own information, and when user B logs in, they see their own information. This is what's called the record level security. Based on the ID, we can see those specific entries within the table as a specific user. So let's do a quick recap on what we learned yesterday. So yesterday we started building this application called Manage Customer Projects. And inside this application, we were able to successfully import a table from Excel, which created this table called Customer Info. And inside this table, we learned that we can click on each one of these cells to make modifications. We can also go to Table Design to modify and manipulate the fields. I also taught you something that's very important here is that every single table that you build inside your account should have a unique ID. You're going to hear me say this a couple of times, even today and tomorrow. I just want to make sure that this sinks in so that when you're building your tables, you don't forget to include a unique value inside every single table. Once the table was imported, we then went to Data Pages, and we were able to build this form, Add New Customer, and a report that allows us to view and manage customers directly from our website. Next thing we learned was how to deploy by clicking on this link and grabbing the embed code. And by pasting that code in our website, we were able to seamlessly embed both of these data pages. So here's my Add New Customer form. And here's my report that allows me to search, view the results, and drill into details for every single entry that we have in the table. I also taught you that you didn't have to use the embed code to embed into your website if you wanted to gain access to these data pages. You can also use a direct URL link, and by bookmarking the link to the browser, you can create a folder for yourself, and inside that folder you can tab back and forth between your data pages. You get the same functionality. The only difference is you can either embed into a website or you can just host through Caspio by using the direct URL links. Okay, and today we're going to learn how to password protect all of this information for our users. So when I log in as user A, maybe I see the first 5 records, and if I log in as user B, I see the second 5 records, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's take a step back here for a moment. Let me show you the process that I go through personally when it comes to building applications inside Caspio. What I like to do initially is open up a notepad or a Word document, and inside this notepad I'm going to create some kind of a workflow or a blueprint of what this application is going to be about. Okay, now you can use a different platform or different system if you have a preference. I like to use the notepad. It's easier for me. The most important thing to identify here is that your application is going to fall in one of the 3 following categories. Your application can either be a public-facing application, an internal application, or a mix of both. So it doesn't matter what application you're building, it's always going to fall in one of these 3 categories. Okay, so even if you're not using Caspio, if you're building your application from scratch using some other system, it's always going to fall under one of these 3 categories. And some examples that fall under public-facing applications, we can have a salary guide or maybe a recipe guide. And these applications are not password protected. They're completely open to the public, so if I went to your website, I will be able to access the information without having to log in. Okay, and the reason why these applications can be very useful, if your website is generating good content, and somebody goes to Google or Yahoo and tries to find that content, there's a good chance that your website is going to be ranked higher up on the results. And if you have a lot of ads placed on your website, you can generate some revenue for yourself. So it's a good way to monetize and make some additional revenue if you are providing good content and if you've done your SEO correctly. Internal facing applications are the exact opposite of public. Internal applications do require a login screen, so you have to provide some credentials in order to access the data. And usually some of the examples that I list under internal, it can be a CRM application where you log in to manage your customers, maybe a project management, maybe task management, inventory. There are a variety of applications that fall under internal types, maybe ticket management. And the application that we are building, that we started building yesterday, is Manage Customer Projects. So we're just going to list that here as well, because this is the application that we are building. And our application, by the time we're done with tomorrow's class, our entire application is going to be password protected. We won't have any public-facing interfaces. Under public/internal, these are more SaaS-type applications, software as a service. Okay, and some examples that I list here could be Realtor.com, it can be Facebook.com, it can be Amazon.com. There are so many of these types of applications nowadays. And typically these applications are either a freemium model where you register and just use their services depending on what they provide, or some companies can provide monthly recurring revenue where you have to pay them a monthly fee in order to use their services. Okay, and you can position your Caspio applications the same way, all right, if that's the offering that you have. So let me just give you an example of what I mean by public/internal. So let's go to Realtor.com just for a moment. Just want to show you why this is considered public/internal. So if you notice here on the home page, I have the ability to search for properties. All right, so if I type in San Jose, let's search for San Jose, California, which isn't very affordable. Just ask me directly. It's very expensive. So notice that I didn't have to log in order to view the listing of these properties here in the middle. Okay, this is all still public-facing information. All right, but the moment I try to save this listing, if I click on this little heart icon, it's going to ask me to log into my account. And the reason why is because it's trying to link this property to your account. So the next time I log into my account, I'll be able to see these listings that I saved. So that's the incentive they provide. You know, a quick way to access all of your saved listings, but in order to do that, you have to create an account. All right? So that's just one example of what I'm talking about when I say public/internal. You have both aspects in this application. All right, so now that we know which category our application is going to fall under, so we know that it's going to be an internal application, what I like to do is just list a title underneath this. And usually when you're building an internal application, you're more than likely going to have different user roles. Now, there could be a case where you just have a single user who accesses everything, but if you have the need to create an admin portal, manager portal, or an employee portal, a supervisor portal, what you want to do is you want to list each one of those categories underneath your title. So because we are limited on time for an intermediate session, I can only build a two-tier user level application where we have the manager portal and we have the employee portal. Now, like I said, if you have a need for more than two, you're just going to list all of your categories in here. So you might even have another level called super admin. Some applications I've seen have 6, 7, 8 different user level types. And when each user level logs in, they see different information or have different privileges, what they can do inside the app. Okay? So I'm only going to have 2. And then I'm going to list bullet points underneath each user group as to what that group will be able to do once they log into the application. Okay, so for my employees, I want them to be able to add new customers. Okay, and every time you're adding something to the table, into the database, you're going to need a submission form. Okay, because a submission form submits data into the table. Okay, I also want my employees to view their own customers. And if you're viewing information via the web, you're going to need a report, because a report allows you to search, view the results, and drill into details. Just to give you a live example, we actually deployed one yesterday. So let's go to our Weebly website. This is what I'm talking about when I say a report. It allows me to search and view my customers. And direct opposite is adding new customers. Here's my submission form that adds data to the table. I have one too many notepads opened up. Let me just close them. All right, and that's all the functionality for now that I want my employees to have. Very simple. As for my management, I want them to add new employees, because as a manager, if I hire somebody new to the team, I would like to add them to the user table. So once again, we'll need a submission form. As a manager, I should have the ability to view, manage employees. For that, we'll need a report. And finally, if my employees can add customers and view their own customers, as a manager, I would like to be able to view all employee submitted customers. So as a manager, I don't want to see a specific set of customers. I want to be able to see all the customers from the table, whereas my employees are only limited to their own customers. That is the difference between these two reports. Okay? Now, the reason why I like to list these bullet points the way you see it here is because each bullet point, it's going to translate into a Caspio data page. And by the time you're done listing all the bullet points, you're going to have a really good idea how many data pages you will need for that specific application. Okay, that's really the point that I'm trying to get across here. It's very helpful when it comes to managing resources and knowing from one application to another how many resources you'll need to build that app. Okay, now there are some times where you could be off by +2 or 3, but for the most part, you'll be able to tell exactly what you'll need in order to build that app. Now, there are some examples that require more than one user table. And what I mean by this, let me explain myself. I want you to write this down if you have a pen handy. If you are building an internal application, an app that falls in this category, you're always going to need just one user table. You don't need more than one user table. And this user table is going to store your managers, your employees, your departments, your credentials, your names, your phone numbers, whatever information you want to store for your employees or your staff. Okay, so just remember, one user table. These types of applications, however, will probably require more than one user table. So what do I mean by that? So let's say we have an application that deals with an education industry. And I'm building a SaaS type application where I want the students to sign up on my website to create a profile. So I'm going to create one table for students because I want this table to store just my student information. Okay? And what this application is going to be about is I want the students to create a profile that pertains to their, let's say, their SAT scores, all of the clubs they attended in high school, and then I would like to have another table for college admins, and these college admins can also register on my website, and I want them to be able to see all the student information. So now they're able to search all the students. And finally, you might have another table for your internal users, your admins, your managers, your employees, etc. Okay? And these users will manage college admins, and they will also manage students. So for example, if a student registers and I don't want this student to log into their application as an admin user, I can check a box that doesn't allow the student to log in anymore. Same thing here. If a college admin registers and something is not correct in their profile, as an internal user, I can go ahead and disable their account. Okay? And under this internal user, well, inside this table, you can have admins, managers, employees, etc. Again, 3 tables, one for students, one for college admins, and one for internal users that stores admins, managers, and employees. Okay, so essentially this table here is that one user table for the internal application. These 2 tables are for external users. Okay, so in a case like this, you might have 3 tables. Great, so let us move on. Now that I know that I'm only going to need one user table because I'm building an internal application, I'm going to go back to my Caspio account, go directly to tables, and we're going to build that user table. So we're going to click on new here to create a new table. And again, remember, you must have a unique field in every table. And just for my own preference, what I like to do is my very first field, I always like to create that unique field as the first field. So I'm going to call this staff ID. And we're going to change that actually to one of these special data types that we have. So it can either be a random ID, auto number, prefixed auto number, or a GUID. Now, a random ID is a randomly generated number, okay? And you can have up to 12 characters for a random ID, and then you can mix and match characters and digits. So if I only want digits, you'll see numbers here below. If I only want characters, you'll see characters. I always like to mix both digits and characters. So every time I add an employee to my table, each employee will have a random ID assigned to them. Think of it like, I don't know if I mentioned this in the prior session, but think of it like, you know, here in the US, we each have a social security number that's unique to us. This is how the government can pull up all of our information based on this 9-digit number. Okay, so that's kind of the comparison that I'm trying to show you here. So every employee will have a unique ID. Everybody here in the US has a unique social that's unique to us. So in the database, you always have to have a unique identifier for every single record that's in the table. Then what we want is date added, because as an admin user, I would like to know what date and time I added this employee to the table, just for historical need, if I need to somehow pull up their history and find out when they were hired or when they were added to the database. Then we're going to have the name of the employee. That should be self-explanatory. Email, I'm also going to turn the email field as a unique field because every employee should have a different email. There's no reason why I have 2 different employees with the same email. That's never going to happen. Okay? And the reason why I make that unique is because I'm going to use the email field as my credential field to log into the application. So email and password are going to be my 2 credential fields. Now the data type for my password field, I'm going to change that to the password special element. Okay. What that does, it encrypts the password on the table level. So if somebody ever breaks into your Caspio account and they open up the table, they're never going to be able to read the passwords. They're going to be encrypted. And you'll see in a moment what I'm talking about. Then I want to have a field called role. This role field is going to be used to identify who the manager is and who the employee is inside my application. So you really just need one field that's going to be used to identify each one of your user groups. And finally, I always like to add account status. I turn that into a checkbox, yes or no. And what this checkbox is going to allow the manager to do is to control who the active employee is and who the inactive employee is. So instead of deleting them from the table, if I don't want this employee to log in anymore, I will just uncheck the box and this employee will no longer be able to log in. Okay, just adds more control to the manager and their privileges. So let's save the table and let's go ahead and call this table TBL staff. And since I already have this table called staff in a different application, it already exists, I have to rename my table to something else. So I'm just going to add one more underscore here. And there is my table of staff. All right, so inside this table, I'm going to list a few employees now. So let's start with Walter White, walter@test.com. We're going to make Walter's password become test. You can see how the password is encrypted. This is what I was talking about. If anybody ever opens up the table, they'll never know what the passwords are. Now Walter, I'd like to make Walter the manager of the application. So if we look inside our blueprint, I created a manager inside my table. Okay? And we're going to give Walter active status. Let's go ahead and add Jesse Pinkman. Jesse@test.com. Password can be test. Now Jesse is going to be the employee of my application. And we're also going to give Jesse active status. And let's add one more, Skylar White. Password test. Also role level employee and active status. So notice here on the left-hand side, every single employee or staff member inside my table is going to receive a random ID. We know what date and time they were added to the table. We have their names inside the table. Every single email is unique, in other words, different. We have their passwords. We know what role level access they have. And at the moment, every single employee is active based on this checkbox. Once you list a few of your staff members inside a table, the next step is to go down to Views. And in Caspio, there are two ways to use the views. The first way, which I'm going to show you today, is how we filter information from our tables based on what we want to see. And the second way, which is merging tables using common values, I'm going to show you that tomorrow. So don't worry about the second method. Okay, we're only going to focus on the first method today, which is filtering data from our tables. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's build our first view. And in my first view, what I would like to do is filter active admins. Or instead of admins, filter active managers, because we only have manager and employee level. Okay, so in order to filter an active manager, I need to filter that information from my staff table that we just built. So we're going to move that staff table to the right. And on the next screen, notice that I already have this name in a different application. So once again, I have to rename it. So I'm just going to call this MNGR. I'm going to abbreviate that. Hit next one more time. And then on this screen, we have to use the criteria tab in order to filter just active managers. And we're going to use these elements on the left-hand side. This is a drag and drop interface. You can move these widgets and snap them in place. And this is the field element. You can also move these to the right. They're like building blocks. Okay. And this is what we're going to do and use in order to filter our active managers. Now, if you want to start over, you can click on the reset link, or you can just hover over the trash can, release, and then you can begin over again. This is the original anchor. You can never move this element anywhere. Okay, so one always has to be in here. All right, so let me show you how we filter active managers. We're going to drag over the field element. I'm going to grab the field called role, and I want that field to equal to manager. And since I'm looking for active managers, I want the second field, which is account status, to be checked. If both of these conditions are true, so if role equals to manager, and if the checkbox is checked from the staff table, this view should only list me now Walter White. Okay, so you can see how we're not listing Jesse and Skylar because we're looking at this field that it equals to manager, not employee. Now let me show you how to set up the second view to filter active employees. So we'll call this filter from the staff table. once again. And using the criteria tab, let's configure this. Field role equals to employee now, not manager, but employee. And since we're looking for active employees, we want that to be checked. Hit finish, and now this view is only going to filter out Jesse and Skylar. And that is correct. This is how in Caspio you're going to create different user levels, who's going to have access to what information, all right? Depending on how many views you have, you're going to need that many authentications as well. Okay, so we go down to this object now. And the only thing that I want you to remember about authentications, this object is really just used to create that login interface. When you see email, password, and a login button, that's what the authentications object is used for. And we're going to build these authentications on top of our views. So I need a login screen that allows just Walter to log in, and I need a login screen that allows Jesse and Skylar to log in. And because we have these two views that filter both of them out, now I'm going to build my authentications on top of those views. So let me show you. Let's build our first authentication. And using the data source, here are my two views that we just created. So let's begin with Walter White's view. So we're going to select this view. Setup options, you have Express and Custom. You can use Express if you need a quick login screen, but to be honest with you, in the last 8 years, I have never used Express once. I always like to go with the Custom radio button because you get a lot more customization options. So if you select Custom, you'll see these 4 radio buttons. These 4 radio buttons are basically asking you, how do you wish to password protect your Caspio application? Do you want to use the recommended data source, which is this view that filters out Walter White? And that view contains his information. We have his email and password inside that view. Do you want Walter to log in using social media? So if you want Walter to log in maybe using his Gmail account, you're going to have to configure these options here in order for Walter White to log in using his Gmail account. Now we have a separate video that teaches you how to do that. Okay, so we're not going to cover that in today's session. The third radio button is a combination of both of these. So he can log in with the credentials that we have in the view, or he can log in using social media. He has an option here. Okay, and finally we have something called single sign-on. This is very helpful if you already have your employee credentials stored in some kind of an online repository and you want to use those existing credentials to log into the Caspio application at the same time. You can connect to that Active Directory or different online repository. In other words, instead of your employees logging in twice, once to your network and once to your Caspio application, once they log into their network, they're automatically logged into their Caspio application at the same time. It just saves them time from having to log in twice. That's the idea. In today's training class, we're going to use the recommended option, and you will see our 2 credential fields, email and password. Notice that for my email field, label says username. This is one thing that irks me about the platform. It's not so much of an issue, but I like to rename that label to say email. It's a bit more clear because I want the users to put in their email address. So I'm having to manually retype that label each time. My password field says password, so that's good. Scroll down below and expand the advanced settings, and you will see a lot more options that you can enable on the login screen. Okay. Logout destination basically means when the user clicks on the logout link, you can specify what website you want the user to go to. You can have your homepage on your website. You can have them go to google.com. Completely up to you. We also have timeout and redirection. What this means, if a user is away from the application for a specific amount of time, for security reasons, we want to log this user out. That way somebody else doesn't go to his computer and looks at the information. So let's just say maybe every 15 minutes, I want the user to go back to the home page of my website if he or she is away from the app. Login redirection on success. This is very useful if you want to hide the navigation menu in an internal application. So for example, what I mean by that, when you see a login screen, that's the only thing that I want to see on the web page. It's just a login screen. Okay, but the moment the user logs in, we are taking him to a different URL where you have the list of your navigation menus. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So instead of seeing the navigation menu on the login screen, which you can if you want to, but this basically just redirects to the user to, let's say, dashboard employee.html. So it's taking him to a different page where we see the different content on this page as opposed to the login screen. Enable cross-application login. This is very powerful because inside Caspio, let's say you have 3 different applications created. You have an application for your sales team, you have an application for your marketing team, and you have an application for your support team. You do not have to have 3 different user tables. One user table in the sales app, one user table in the support app, and one user table in the marketing app. All you need is one user table, and you can put that user table in any 3 of those applications, and when you enable cross-application login, you can use that same user table across 3 different applications. Because that user table is going to have all of your marketing employees, all of your sales employees, and all of your support employees. You just have a field called department, and you can associate each employee with that specific department. And when you enable this checkbox, well, now you're basically using that single user table across 3 different applications to allow users to log in. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, because if you have 3 different user tables, that's just creating redundancy. You don't want to do that. It's not a best way of building applications. Just one user table across all of your applications. Only 1 session per user. If Jesse logs into his account and Jesse gives his credential to somebody else in the company, and that person logs in using Jesse's credential, it's going to log Jesse out because we're only saying 1 session per user. Okay. Show login form on failure page. So if you fail to log in, you will see a pop-up form that lets them know. And autofocus on the first field basically creates that blinker on the first field of the login screen if you want to be automatically blinking as soon as you see the login screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this authentication. We're going to call this MNGR auth for authentication. Here's my first login screen that allows Walter White to log in because we built that login screen on top of our manager view. Let me now build a second one for our employees. So we're selecting our employee view, custom, recommended, and we're going to call this email. Click on create, and we'll call this EMPLY auth for authentication. Once you get to this point, you can give yourself a little tap on the shoulder because this is really as difficult as it gets to creating different user roles and login screens for each user role. This login screen will now allow Jesse and Skylar to log in, and this one is going to allow Walter White. And once you have these authentications created, you can now apply those authentications across all of your data pages. So for example, my add new customer form, according to my blueprint, falls under the employee user level. So what I'm going to do is edit this form. And on the next screen, remember how we passed this yesterday, access and security? If you now enable this checkbox, you can grab either the employee authentication that gives access to Jesse and Skylar, or manager authentication that gives Walter White access. So who do we want to give access? Jesse and Skylar. Click on finish. And now on my website, when I refresh my form, you will see that login interface on top of the form. And if I try to log in as Walter, it's not going to let me. Or anybody else for that matter. If I log in as Joe at test.com, password test, It's not going to let me. Notice that my report is still not password protected. So what I need to do is edit that data page as well. And on the same screen, we enable this checkbox and we apply for Jesse and Skylar. Hit finish. And now both of my data pages should be password protected. Nobody has access to these two data pages unless they're Skylar or Jesse. Now the reason why we create that checkbox active status in the table, let me show you why, okay? Just so you understand what's really happening behind the scenes in your Caspio database. So if I go to the main table and I open up my staff table, here are my checkboxes for active status. And at the moment, everyone is active. But if I say, well, I don't want Jesse to be active anymore, okay? What's happening in the view now that filters out active employees, we are no longer going to see Jesse's information because this view is filtering all active employees. Okay? The view is basically just used to filter from the staff table, which further means that because my authentication is built on top of this view, and if I do try to log in as Jesse, it's not going to let me because Jesse's an inactive employee. Now what happens if I do make Jesse an active employee? Let's go back to the staff table. And I will once again make him an active employee. Now my view should filter Jesse's information. There's Jesse. My authentication is built on top of this view, which means now if I try to log in as Jesse, let's try that one more time. I can log in as Jesse, and now I have the ability to add new customers and manage customers. All right, let us move on. Let me now show you why folders are very useful. Okay. Folders are used to organize data pages. Just like you organize your files on your computer, we use folders to organize data pages. And the way I want you to use folders is you're going to create a folder for every user group that your application has. So if your user group or if your application has a manager level role, you're going to create a folder for managers. If you have one for employees, you're going to create a folder for employees. Okay? And then what you do is you basically move these data pages inside the respective folder. I know that both of these data pages are password protected based on the employee authentication. You can even click on properties and you can see the authentication that's applied to this data page is employee auth. Second one, you will see that it's employee auth. And if I know that both of these are accessed by the employees, Jesse and Skylar, I can click on more, click on move, expand my application container and find those two folders. So here's my employee folder. I'm going to click on move. Same thing with this data page. It's a much cleaner way of building applications if you have folders, because if you don't use the folders, you're going to end up with a long list of data pages and it becomes really difficult to find the ones that you need to edit. But if you use the folders and you know that you need to edit the employee side of things, you can just expand the folder and find those data pages. Very important is that your folders are not going to affect the way your application functions in any way. Their only use case is to help you stay organized. Okay? Now you may be wondering, well, at the moment, we have two authentications. One that gives access to my employees, Jesse and Skylar, and one that gives access to Walter White. What if I have some data pages that need to be accessed by both Walter White and Jesse and Skylar, not just one or the other? If that's the case, you're going to need to configure your third view that gives access to everyone, or depending on how you want to filter the view. It's your call. Okay, you can get as granular as you want. Okay, so for example, if I set up my third view now, and this view I should filter all I want to filter everyone from the staff table that's active. Again, from the staff table, and in the criteria tab, we don't care if they're a manager or an employee. The only thing that we care about is that their account status is checked. That is the only thing. We only care about active staff members. So when I hit finish, you'll now notice that this view shows me everyone who is active from the table, because that's how I'm filtering this view. I then need to set up my third authentication that filters out everyone based on this newly created view. So here's the view that filters all active staff members, custom, recommended, and we'll just set this up as email. Hit create, and we're going to call this all access auth. All right, now that I have this authentication that gives access to Walter, Jesse, and Skylar, if I have some data pages here that need to be accessed by everyone, I will apply that authentication. So for example, I only have 2 data pages built so far. Let's just say that everyone had to access this add new customer form. I would click edit. And now on this screen, where I have this checkbox enabled, I would select all access authentication. And now Walter, Jesse, and Skylar will be able to add customers. Hopefully this is making sense. Depending on the application that you're building and how you want the user level permissions to work, this is where you have to play around with the views and authentications, and you just have one internal user table, and you filter out using the views and authentications. It takes a little bit of practice, all right? Don't think of it as a daunting task. It's really not. It just takes a little bit of practice to identify who has what privileges. And once you open up those views, you're going to be saying, aha, okay, now I'm seeing the correct employees who should have access to something that I need to have them access to. Okay? So let's go back to employee authentication, click finish. And because I have this view that filters out everyone, I will create a folder for all access. And this folder, if I have some data pages, I will move those data pages inside this folder, and I would apply my authentication called all access. Believe me, I know it's a lot of information to absorb all at once, especially if you're seeing this for the first time. But with enough practice, you'll get the hang of it. Trust me, it took me about, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks to finally get a good handle on how things work in Caspio and to be able to build these applications. The next thing that I want to talk about is how do we stamp information from one table and stamp that information into a different table so that we can create a relationship between the 2 tables. Okay. Remember how I said yesterday we have one-to-manys, we have many-to-many relationships. This is very common in a database environment. Okay. So looking at my application, I know that at the moment I'm logged in as Jesse. Okay. So if I submit a new customer as Jesse, let's take a look. So we'll say Shelly Smith, and we'll just put state Alabama and hit submit. Okay. In my table, in the back end, in a database of customers, and if we scroll all the way down, we're going to be able to find Shelly Smith from Alabama. The only problem with this entry is that we have no idea what employee submitted that information in the database. I logged in as Jesse, that's fine, but I know as Jesse that I was the one who added that, but as an admin user of your Caspio account, you have no idea, you have no way to reference this entry with Jesse. So how do we now associate this record with Jesse's information? So let's go to the staff table. Inside my staff table, I have Jesse's primary key. This is the unique value, staff ID. What I'm trying to accomplish is somehow to grab Jesse's ID and automatically stamp that ID inside the customer info table. Because if I had that ID in both tables, then I can reference and know who this customer belongs to. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go to table design and add one more field to my table called employee or staff ID. And this needs to be text 255. Now I have to teach you something right now, and hopefully you can write this down. I'm also going to send you these notes at the end. But this is just something that you'll have to memorize and learn when it comes to database relationships inside Caspio. If your primary key is an auto number, foreign key, the key that's actually stamped in the related table, needs to be set as an integer. Okay. However, if your primary key is a random ID, prefixed ID, or a GUID, a foreign key in the related table needs to be stamped as text 255. So when it comes to table relationship, there's something called the primary key, which is the unique key that I talked about already a few times. But if you want to stamp that primary key in the related table, that becomes now the foreign key. Just database terminology. Okay, so let me explain now so that you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about here. My primary key in the staff table is the random ID. So let me show you inside my account. Let me save this table for now. And let's go to the staff table. All right, so here's my primary key. It's random ID that every staff employee has. Okay, random ID. All right, so in my text file, if it's a random ID as the primary key and I wish to stamp that random ID in a different table, it needs to be set, the data type needs to be set to text 255. And now this primary key that you're seeing becomes a foreign key inside a customer info table. Oops, wrong table. Give me a second. All right, there's my staff ID. This is going to become a foreign key, and it's going to be stamped as text 255. The reason why is because my primary key has digits and characters, and I can't really select this to be an integer because it's going to look for just numbers. And I can't really select this to be a number because, again, my primary key has characters too, and if I set this to number, it's not going to allow me to do that because my primary key has characters as well. That's why this needs to be set as text 255. Okay, does that make sense? Please let me know. I just want to make sure everyone understands this. If you don't understand it, please ask me questions. I can definitely repeat myself one more time to make sure you understand the whole idea behind the primary key and the foreign key. Okay, great. Let's move on. So what's going to happen on the next submission, here's my staff ID column now. Here's Shelly Smith, but because I created this entry before I introduced this field, there's nothing here. On the next submission, we should be able to automatically stamp Jesse's ID. Now let's go to data pages and let me show you how to do that. So we're going to open up our employee folder and we're going to edit our customer form. Okay, so I'm using my customer info table here. This is where I just introduced that staff ID field. And here's that staff ID field. I'm going to move that to my form. And for now, I'm just going to leave this as a text field and hit finish. Let me refresh my form. All right, so there's my staff ID field. It doesn't make any sense for Jesse to manually type in his ID every time he adds a customer. The system should allow me to hide this field and automatically pull his information into that field because we already have his ID in the staff table. Okay, so now how do I configure this so it does that for me automatically? Let's edit the form one more time. And this may be the hardest thing for me to explain. Just bear with me, just because it's the way the system was built, there's no easier way to explain this, okay? So here's what's happening here, and it really helps if you think backwards, all right? On my Add New Customer form, I use this authentication for employees that's coming from this object. And this authentication is only given access to Jesse and Skylar. My authentication is built on top of the view that's filtering active Jesse and Skylar, and my view was built on top of the staff table that's pulling information, and we're pulling Jesse and Skylar's information. So in a way, these three objects are linked together. Okay, and because I have my employee authentication built or used on this data page, on this screen, when you highlight the staff ID field and you hide it, you can grab the authentication field and you can look as far back as the staff info table to grab the staff ID of the employee. Okay, now if I disable the authentication and I go back to the same field, notice that I can no longer grab the authentication field. All right, so just make sure you always have this enabled. Apply the proper authentication field, and we're going to grab the staff ID. When I hit finish now and click or refresh my form, we no longer see that field. It's still there behind the scenes. It's automatically populating Jesse's ID in the field. We just don't see it. Okay, so let's make one more entry here. Tom Jones, Arizona, hit submit. Let's go directly to our table now. What we should see now in this case is Jesse's ID stamped in the table. And voila, there it is. All right, there's Tom Jones, and we can see that this is Jesse's ID. So now we can create a relationship between these two tables, and this becomes a one-to-many relationship. The reason why this is a one-to-many relationship, if I submit one more customer as Jesse, let's go with Carrie Thompson or Thompson in the state of Colorado, hit submit, refresh my table, scroll down, there is Carrie, and we can see the same ID that belongs to Jesse. All right, so one to many, one employee, many customers that belong to that employee. This is what's referred to as a one-to-many relationship. All right, and in this case, because in my notepad, I want my employees to just view their own customers, if I look at the report that's currently on my website for managing customers, I'm logged in as Jesse, by the way, remember that, okay? When I hit search, I am still seeing the entire database, all 634 customers. Whereas I only want Jesse to see those two customers that belong to his ID. So now let me teach you how to enable record level security. On my report, we're going to edit this. So you apply the employee authentication, that's correct. And on the following screen, you will find something that's called record level security, or RLS for short. When you enable this checkbox, let me show you how to configure these two drop-downs. The first thing we're looking at is the authentication staff ID. So when I log in as Jesse, it's verifying my ID. It's looking for my ID. Okay. In the related table, so matching field in the current data source. What do we mean by current data source? It's the customer info table. And now my customer info table also has Jesse's ID stamped inside it. So I need to select staff ID. Now if both of these conditions match, so I log in with the staff ID from the staff table as Jesse, and in that table of customers, it's looking for the staff ID, Jesse's staff ID. If you configure this correctly, hit finish. Now in my report, when I manage my customers, I should only be able to see two customers that belong to Jesse. And this is what we were talking about when we say record level security. We're only seeing records that belong to our specific ID. Now, when you're doing testing, you can actually click preview here because I don't have a logout link anywhere on my website. I could add that, but it's going to take me a little bit of time. You can always click on preview directly on the data page inside Caspio, and we have this button for data page logout. Okay, so now on my website, I should be logged out as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and log in as Skylar now. Does anybody want to guess how many records Skylar will be able to see when I click search? Can I get an answer here from somebody in the class? What do you think? How many customers will Skylar be able to see? Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the answer is 0 because there are no customers linked to Skylar's ID. All right, so let me show you. If I hit search, you will see the no records found because in my table of customers, because now I have that record level security enabled, there are no customers here that match up to Skylar's ID. Now you as a database admin, you can always manipulate this manually. So if you go to the staff table, and let's say you grab Skylar's ID, and you just come over here and say, well, I want this customer that belongs to belong to Skylar, and you can just keep propagating that throughout your column, depending on how many you want Skylar to be able to see. And now on the website, Skylar will be able to see 6 or 7 customers that I have manually assigned her to. Okay. Hopefully today's session wasn't too overwhelming. Always remember, when you're building an internal application, is to set up your table first. Then you filter out who's going to have access to what. You build your authentications on top of your views, and then you simply apply your authentications to who's going to have access to what data page. If you want to stamp IDs in a related table, remember these database rules. All right, we have the primary key, which is that unique identifier. If you wish to stamp the primary key in a different table, that becomes a foreign key now, and you just have to set up your data types properly. Just like we did in today's example, I'm going to show you 2 more times of this in tomorrow's session, so you will see in the advanced class a different way of stamping IDs in tables by passing parameters. It's a bit more advanced, but you'll see that tomorrow. When it comes to table relationships, one more thing that I want to mention, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, we have what's called a relationship screen. Not to overwhelm you even more, but this screen is great for visual learning, to understand how your tables are linked together. So we have a staff table and we have a customer info table that I can include inside my application or inside this screen. And the way these 2 tables are linked together are via the staff ID. So here's my primary key in the staff table that's linked to my foreign key staff ID. And Caspio is going to recognize this relationship type as one-to-many. Okay, now I'm going to talk about referential integrity tomorrow, so don't worry about this for now, and don't worry about the display value. When you hit create here, you'll see how automatically Caspio recognizes this relationship as one-to-many. And believe me, this screen can get very, very complex, especially if you have many-to-many relationships and multiple one-to-many relationships. I've seen this screen have up to 50 to 60 tables. And it's like a giant web, all these links to tables, what's linked to what. This is my states lookup table that I borrowed from a different application. Okay, and this just has a indeterminate relationship. It's really just a one-to-one. It's not really a relationship. It's because in my customer info form, I'm linking this to the lookup table of states. Okay, so if you remember that on my website, when we went to add new customer, you will be able to see that I'm linking my dropdown to that US states table. Okay, and that relationship is simply just indeterminate because it's a one-to-one. I can just select the state from this lookup table. I always try to be as thorough as possible. I know this is very difficult to explain because it is such a robust platform, but you really got to take these baby steps when it comes to explaining, just to make sure everyone understands what's really happening in the database and how things behave on the web, because it's connected. In a way, you can create all of your workflows using data pages to the point where you never really have to log into Caspio Bridge unless you're just modifying fields or making changes to your applications. But in terms of workflow, you can build all the data pages and publish them on the web. For example, let me give you one last example, and if you have to go, not a problem. Just stick around if you can. But I'm going to show you one thing what I mean by this. Instead of you coming in here manually to your table and adding your customer, you can create a form that allows the manager to add customers. Here's the idea. So we go to data pages now, and we expand the manager folder because only the manager has the ability to add customers. Or I'm sorry, not customers, add employees. Because if you look at the blueprint, manager has the ability to add employees. Before I was just adding them directly in the table, but I can build a data page for the manager. It's going to become a submission form. We're going to build that on top of the staff table because that's where we're adding the information, and we're going to call this add new employee, burgundy style, and we're going to restrict access only to Walter White. He's the only user that has the ability to add employees. Here are all of my fields. We're going to move them all to the right. This is randomly generated, and this is automatically stamped, so we don't need to have this in the table or in the form. And now you modify each one of your fields. We have the name, that could be a required field, email. We could actually apply the special element email here, so it looks for the @ symbol and the period afterwards. It's automatically required field because we made it unique inside the table. And if you make a field unique inside the table, on the form it's always going to be a required field. Password, we can do something like show password strength. Minimum strength required can be fair. Now, the role field has either manager or employee. So what you can do here is you can maybe create a quick radio button for yourself. If I'm hiring somebody, I want them to be either a manager or employee inside the table, directly from the form. You can have this be a drop-down if you want. And finally, account status, we want this to be a checkbox, and for my display text, I'm going to say check. Okay, hit finish. And now if you embed this form in the manager portal, I'm going to hit deploy here, and I'm just going to grab the URL because I don't have a web page to embed. So let's go ahead and paste that here. And if I try to log in as Jesse, who's the employee, it's not going to let me. However, if I log in as Walter, who is the manager, as Walter, I now have the ability to add this employee. I don't have to add him directly in the table. I have this nicely built form for myself, and let's just go ahead and add David as my 4th staff member. David at test.com. Password can be test123. Minimum strength required is fair, so I have to create more of a complex password. And I want David to be an employee. And I don't want David to log into the application just yet. The reason why, maybe there's some leftover paperwork that he needs to sign before I give him full access to log into the application, but I can still add him to the table. So when I hit submit, and we go to our staff table now, there's David, right? He's in the system, but he's not an active employee yet, which also means that if David tries to log in, he's not going to be able to because inside the view that's filtering active employees, we're not going to see David's information. And because my authentication is built on top of this view, it's not letting David log into the app. Okay? And similar to how you add data to the table, so for example, my staff table now, I could go directly to my table and check David to make him active. But better yet, you can build yourself a report that allows you to do that. So under the manager folder, if I build my one more data page here, let's go with the report. Tabular format. I'm going to do this really quickly here. So staff table, because that's where all my staff employees are. View manage staff, burgundy style, and I only want Walter to be able to manage staff members. I don't want employees to be able to manage themselves in this way. So no search form, no need for record level security because manager is the highest level of the application, so they should be able to see everything. Not going to filter based on any fields. And then in my results page, I want to show everything. In this case, it's okay. Let's go ahead and enable each one of these for the Walter White. And we will now leave these as is. Let's show 25 records. I only have 4 staff members. And we're going to disable the details page for now and hit finish. So now if you deploy this data page to your manager portal by embedding it or by using a direct URL link, Walter has the ability to add employees via this form, and Walter now has the ability to view all the employees from that staff table. And using this column here, we can see who the active employees are and who one inactive employee is, in this case David. Now I want to make David an active employee. Let's say he signed all the paperwork. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. You can click on a little pencil icon, check this box, hit update, and now David's going to be active inside the table. You will see that here. All right, which also means that David is going to be showing up on my view. Here it is, and because this is built on top of that view, I should now be able to log into the application as David, and if I add a customer as David, it's going to stamp David's ID in the customer info table, and now we know what customers belong to David. This is the workflow that I'm talking about. Okay, when it comes to assigning records for the different employees, managing information, all of that can be done using data pages. The only time you really need to log into Caspio if you're really just modifying the application. If I no longer want this phone number field in the form, I have to log into Caspio and remove it from the data page. Okay, that's essentially what I'm trying to tell you with that. Workflows, use the data pages. Building apps, you have to log into Caspio. Okay. All right, I spent a little more time showing you a few other things, but if you look at my blueprint, I have basically created 4 of our data pages for this app: add new employees, view our own customers, and add new customers. And the only thing that's left here is for one more data page for managers to be able to view all employees submitted customers, which is fairly easy to build. You just need to build a new data page on the customer info table.